drive the conversation with you a little more, Lauren. But knowing myself, I have a lot of questions about this topic and a lot of probably things to contribute to. So I won't be like totally a fly on the wall. But yeah, I'm excited. We've been doing LinkedIn Lives for a while now. And one of my favorite things in the world to do right now is just like show up and have conversations that I don't really hear people having on LinkedIn. Lauren, I know you're more active on like Instagram and stuff like that, and really in person. I think a lot of your lifestyle is like being physically in proximity with people. But like I'm super excited to explore with you today the idea of integration, which let me tee it up and kind of send it off to you because this is your world more than mine. But I guess to set the framework as to why we're even having this conversation in the first place is when I started Jumpsuit, I saw this big trend of people leaving the 9 to 5 to go build their own thing, right? And so a lot of my world has been freelancers, independent contractors, more in like the digital space, right? So we're talking about like graphic designers and people who build websites and make videos and stuff. But another thing that's been happening is you have people like you leaving the 9 to 5 to go do their own practices, therapeutic practices, coaching practices, and it's a whole other world that exists. And I've been integrating with myself for a while now, and I'm particularly interested in this space of how when someone leaves the system and they kind of go out on their own, there's a lot of like trauma responses that come up, right? It's like fight or flight. Like, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to survive on my own? When you have a little bit more space in your life to start to do personal work, so many things come up. And there's a lot of support that I've personally found that I needed to be able to exit this thing and find myself holistically in this new thing, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who have come alongside me. There's a lot of modalities I've been experimenting with. And as you know, that's everyone's own personal journey of what works for them. So I'm excited to talk to you today about integration and what that world contains. I think it's a new idea for many people. Like maybe they've heard the word integration, but not in the sense. So it might make sense to even start with defining what the hell are we even talking about? How did you get into it in the first place? And then we'll just flow from there, if that sounds good.
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So integration, I think it's interesting, what you just said. On one hand, it's nothing new. It's human as human can be. Integration is the way that we process an experience after it happens. It's the way that we weave an experience, the insights learned, into our daily life. And like you were talking about, like doing something impactful, like leaving the 9 to 5 and then trying to figure out what to do next, brings up a lot of stuff. I mean, anything can be like that, whether it's having a child, whether it's, leaving home, it could be, moving away from your hometown. Like there are so many different things that we do that take us out of our comfort paradigm and shove us into something, like something in us compelled forward to do something new. And sometimes it can feel like launching a boat from a dock and being like, all right, we're going to set the compass in this direction. We're going to go. How are we going to navigate this? So for me, it's learning how to navigate. It's like, to use that analogy of a ship leaving a dock, it's like, you take your crew, you make sure your ship is functioning well, and you take your supplies, and then you know how to use a compass. And then after that, there's there'll be things that'll happen that are unpredictable, but if you have your tools and if you have your supports, then you can ground in and navigate.
Yeah. So like, how has integration evolved for you personally and with your practice that you've been practicing?
Yeah. So a little bit of that. So integration. So I've been out of the 9 to 5 probably for, it's been about 10 or 12 years. And prior to that, I worked in 9 to 5's nonprofit work in the incarceration system and a lot of these human-centered systems where I was watching people, figure out how to navigate life once they've been through something hard, whether it was exiting homelessness, whether it was leaving the prison system, whether it was like having babies. I know a lot of people who are parents and just like entering the world that we're all mostly inhabiting and being like, well, what do I do here? How do I do this? The way in my practice as a therapist, whether I'm working with people who are navigating trauma or just navigating a life stage, or maybe they've had a really impactful experience or have, whether that be through some kind of psychedelic medicine or a spiritual awakening, they're figuring out how to walk on the earth again. And for many of us in our cultural paradigm, we don't have as many resources for how to navigate those really deep, impactful changes. A lot of us go through life masking and just being like, I don't think I'm going to figure it out until we realize we don't. And so a lot of what I do is based on my own personal experience through many of those things I just described, knowing the kind of support I needed kind of through trial and error, and then through wisdom seeking and seeking out supports and mentors and elders. And then seeing where I'm at now and being like, okay, yeah, this is something that I can offer now because I have the lived experience. I have the wisdom, whether it be from traditional learning environments or just feet on the ground living. And I want to show up with that. And it's more important now as we enter into, a lot has changed in the last several years, a lot is changing, and people are trying to figure out, what do we do with what is? How do we take what works, compost the rest, and recreate something new? So for me, integration is a lot of that cyclical process of creating something out of something that is going away.
Can you talk a little bit more about feeling split, or some people talk about feeling like fractalization occurring, what that means, what causes that, and the role that integration plays in that dynamic?
Yeah. So when we go through an impactful change, there's so many different frameworks to look at this from. The lens of traditional psychotherapy looks at that as like a shattering of worldviews and beliefs. Maybe the way you thought things were suddenly revealing that they're not that way. And so all of the ego protections, or if we use, like, if some of you may know of internal family systems, like looking at parts work, inner child work, it's looking at the ways in which those parts of our ego have developed to protect us. And then suddenly we're living in a world in which those same mechanisms don't work anymore. And so it's learning how to teach those parts of us a different script or different tools or different ways of being in this world that allow us to healthily exist, and kind of like bring all of those parts back together and be like, hey, we're a council here, talking about like our internal system. We're a council here, and we're working together, and we're communicating and working through this world to live a life that is aligned with our values.
So one of the words, a word trauma, similar to the word integration, is like often, I think, misunderstood or used in different ways. So like, how is trauma a part of this process, and where is trauma process, and like, how might the impact of the integration look with or without?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because trauma right now, there's just the dictionary definition of it, and then there's the clinical definition of it, and then there's the social definition of it. And we're seeing a lot of changes in the social definition of it. It's like you can go on any social media and people are talking about trauma and like all of these ways that are not within the clinical framework, but are kind of just within a social framework of how we're defining that. The way that I explain trauma to people, it's less about what's happened to you and more about how you're able to respond to what happens to you. Because the same event can happen to two different people, and maybe one person had a support or an internal framework for understanding the world that helped them be like, okay, that was scary, but now I know how to seek safety, and I have these people around me who are validating me and helping me seek safety again. Another person over here could have been alone, could have developed, had things in life that develop a lens through which they saw the world as like, well, I must be the problem, so I somehow am at fault. There's many iterations of that. So trauma there is the event, and there can be like agreed upon events that are potentially traumatic, like, natural disasters, or the loss of a loved one, or an unexpected injury. But the traumatic response results from how we are supported after that event. And so those things can really fracture our worldview when we experience them in an unsupported way. So integration can help with, prolonged trauma responses by creating the safety, by creating a set and a setting with a facilitator or a care provider who's like, okay, I'm here with what you've got going on. I'm not going anywhere. I'm supporting you. And we're going to, rework some of those faulty beliefs that you may be carrying that prolong the pain. And so integration, whether we're talking about, from trauma, from just a typical life event, or some other sought experience, can really help with bringing you back home.
You mentioned set and setting. That's another term that, I hear a lot in different uses. So like, would you mind diving into that a little bit more, and even in the process of integration?
Yeah. So set and setting is part of the preparation. So in my work, like whether I'm facilitating something, whether it's, just like a big journey for someone, a big, kind of an event or therapeutic intervention, preparation and integration are kind of the bookends of the process, and set and setting is part of the preparation. And so, yeah, that's like a term that has been around for a long time. It was, starting back in the 50s, whenever these type of work started to gain more traction. But it's centering on safety and security and consent. And so when you have a set and a setting, that means like the person that you're with in an experience, and the setting that you're in. You get to decide what feels safe and comfortable. You get to decide the parameters ahead of time. You get to decide like, I like this or I don't like that. And so that's an incredibly important thing, because when our bodies feel safe, like our hearts and our emotions and our psyche can feel safe to drop to the deeper areas that maybe hold some of the old wounds or traumas that we're looking to unearth.
Yeah.
You do somatic therapy as part of one of the many things you do, and you're starting to bring the body into it. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what somatic work is?
Yeah, so somatic, that word again, it's another one of those really popular phrases that are happening right now. All it means is body centered. It means of the body. It means using the body primarily as the tool to navigate what's coming up. Sorry, my dogs are in the other room barking. And doing it in a conscious way. There's movements that happen involuntarily, and that's like a different subset of body work. The somatic work is like guiding the body through different movements or processes that allow for the emotional body or the psychological body to mirror what the physical body is doing. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating too. When you look at the way that also I approach things from a pretty integrative place, where it's like, all of our systems are very interconnected, and we've known that for a while. And we're, to speak about integration, I sense that we are in an integrative time of our current paradigm, because we kind of broke off and created all these specialties, and you go to the doctor here and the dentist here and the psychiatrist here and the shaman here, there's all these different places we go. And then now it's like, wait a minute, these are all interconnected. Like, how do we start to like bring this back into like a whole person care? And on a macro scale too, like we are also in an integrative stage with a lot of what we know, where it's like, yeah, what we do with our bodies impacts our health and our heart and our mind and our spirit, and to ignore that isn't working. So we're trying to remember that.
Truth.
Yeah.
How long have you been we've been talking about practices, and it seems like there's a lot of them. Like you have your, traditional therapy, but like, how did you get into this space? What's your background, like origin story a little bit?
Yeah, I always like this question because I get to tell it slightly different each time, just because it's like each time I tell it, it's like, oh, there's that little piece. So I would say it goes back to me being a young person and always being very fascinated and drawn to the human experience as well as the natural world. As I'm sure many people can relate, I was a very sensitive child, and so was very attuned to everything happening in the world. And at the time, no one was there to explain that to me, so I just kind of figured out how to deal with that. So I entered, a lot of creativity. My early life was in art, and I just dove into art. And so my undergraduate degree was in art. And even then, though, I remember thinking, I want to do something with people, and I looked into art therapy programs. My grandfather was a psychiatrist in Mississippi back in the 1950s, 60s, and for several decades, and helped really found some of the early services that we have now in Mississippi that were not very popular at the time, or they were very new thoughts about ways to treat people. And so he was a big inspiration. And so about 20 years ago, when I was still in undergrad, I decided I wanted to focus on working with people, and moved to Nashville to serve in AmeriCorps. And so I served in AmeriCorps for a few years and worked in homeless outreach, working with people, living in the margins and living in that liminal space where it's kind of, and when I reflect on it now, it's people kind of stuck, unable to integrate their experience into a life that they can take care of their basic needs and get support and seek help. And that's been a long, winding road, and to this place where about 10 years ago, I finished my master's degree, and that's the clinical path that I've been in, and it's like I'm deeply appreciative of it. The deeper path has been in my work with plants, both the subtle medicines and the more powerful medicines, and traveling all over the world when I can to out of a deep curiosity and reverence for that world. And then also integrating those experiences that come from a different, an incredibly powerful different set of knowledge than the way we understand things through a more Western educational institution standpoint. And so where I find myself is on that bridge, that liminal bridge between those two worlds, and being like, hey, we've got to, let's remember the wisdom that is old, that is held by the people carrying the torch at the thresholds, as well as integrating it into the ways we can understand things through our more institutional, educationally institutional understanding.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. James, can I put you on the spot just a little bit?
Yeah.
Are you down for that?
Sure.
Yeah. So James dove into ayahuasca.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how long ago it was. And
September 29, 2023. I'll never forget.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Born again.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not James's boss, right? Because everyone who works at Jumpsuit is their own boss. But I do hire James to provide services for me. And when he came back from his first ayahuasca experience, it was like very noticeable for both of us that it's really hard to do business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't have the words to even articulate the experience that he had just had. And of course I wanted to be supportive of him in that and give him the kind of space to be able to integrate. And so we've been working on figuring that out. And it's important to me as someone who has a business and a business infrastructure to create new types of, I don't know, systems and allowances for people to go on their own journeys of discovery, and it doesn't have to be with plant medicine.
Right. Yeah.
It could be anything. I mean, it could be like you have a therapy session at 11 AM in the middle of your schedule, and then how are you supposed to go back to work after that,
Mhm.
right?
Exactly.
It's really, really important for people who run businesses and work with other people to understand that this is important and we have to figure out how to support it. So that's just like a little seed I'm planting for anyone who's watching that is trying to, I don't know, be a little more modern and supportive of what humans need. But I'm wondering if you can kind of elaborate on what happens when someone goes on a psychedelic journey and what happens to the system typically after that, and what kind of
Mhm.
support someone may or may not need.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can speak to that from my own experience, and I can speak about that from my learned experience of what I have been able to glean from, like I said, like the people and cultures that have, held strong to this knowledge, and then also incorporating that into our research that we have now. So there's so much fascinating research that's going on. So briefly, like what is happening in those psychedelic experiences is our default mode network, the part of our brain that kind of like runs on autopilot, that kind of like all of our same patterns, our thought patterns, our emotional patterns, it kind of operates on this autopilot. So in a psychedelic experience, the default mode network gets suspended and it kind of goes like, oh, it's over here. And now we're sitting in this place of the witness. And so we're witnessing kind of all of our stuff from a place of observation rather than participation. And so we're really able to then apply some of the preparation or any work that we've done up until then to be able to see that ourselves through that lens, and then have that deep commitment to maybe making changes, or there's a really deep and profound experience with encountering our depth of understanding. And many people describe these as spiritual experiences. And I know that for many people, sometimes, coming back and like finding a framework to talk about what in the world just happened, how to then like take that time to integrate their understanding of their patterns into their life when they're coming back to a life that is the same as it was before. And so they're like, whoa, wait a minute. I want to change this thing, but my whole life is built around this particular way of being. And there's a lot that comes up with that. There can be some fear. Some people are just like, no, immediately. For most people, it's like, it's a process of just like, okay, how to just not like rip the Band-Aid off of my entire life and, kind of go through it. How can I do this in a way that doesn't cause more harm to where I'm at, but also starts to shift my compass in the direction of where I know I want to be. So that is what happens for a lot of people. And then also developing the words and the framework to talk about the experience itself is an important thing as well.
Yeah. What do you advise for someone that may like have a psychedelic experience, but not either be in an environment because it's the people around them where like integration may not ever happen?
Yeah.
Or they may not be able to go to someone and be like, I need to quote unquote integrate,
Mm-hmm.
What should someone do in that situation where they're not going to have someone to listen to them for 1, 2, 5, 20 hours at a time,
So if I'm hearing correctly, you're saying like for people that choose to go have that experience, but then they're either choosing not to find support, or there's just not going to be support. Like
potentially both. Yeah, maybe there's just not support, or they don't know where to find it, or they're in like a family dynamic where it's like they can't even ask their family how to, what any advice there?
Yeah. I mean, I think that support is essential. And so if you've had an experience, maybe it wasn't a great setting, maybe it was kind of a traumatic experience in itself because there were some elements that weren't supportive. I think you truly do finding support is essential, even whether it's just A quick Google search, you can come up with some online integration groups that are available. You might want to vet those a little bit. I think at minimum, getting out in nature, at minimum, getting out where you're kind of away from human elements and more connected to the elements of nature, even though I think it's funny that we say go out in nature, but we're very much nature. We're very much animals. And so it's kind of like returning to the basics. If there isn't a live person that you can talk to, whether in person or online, going in nature, it's really basic self-care things like taking care of yourself, getting movement, getting sleep, drinking water. It sounds really basic, but that is the first place to start. Whether someone was getting, one-on-one integration processing with someone or not, I think it's a really good place to start. Spending time with animals, if you're an animal person.
Yeah, hugging a dog. Yeah.
Adopt a dog.
Yeah. So you've spoken about, there's obviously I have participated in an ayahuasca ceremony. I've taken psilocybin. And a lot of these are becoming, very commercialized. Yeah. I even saw that there's now ayahuasca gummies that someone made with you take 2 different ones with the inhibitor. And so I'm like, okay, this world is coming to us. Where is that disconnect between the commercialization and plus the plant, from the earth? Yeah. Your opinion on it?
My opinion on it. My opinion is, I have a very clear opinion, and I also stand in the threshold of curiosity and openness. My opinion is strong, and that I really do believe that staying close to the integrity of the plant and the lineages that have held the wisdom of how to work with it is important. And also, I am just one person with an opinion, and can also hold the door, hold the porthole, say the porthole of curiosity of okay, well, let's see. I think the reason why I believe it's important to stay close to that wisdom is because there are ways in which our bodies and psyches respond to these experiences that we're just beginning to understand. And from looking at the way we've treated other things, anytime that we separate something from the source and isolate just the thing we want away from all the other components, that the other subtle chemical compounds, the land itself, the people itself, the songs, anytime we create that isolation chamber, so to speak, it tends to not always stay functional, if that makes sense. So for me, with an integrative mindset, it feels important to bring all the components of a plant and the experience if we're also going to wanting it to be an integrative experience for ourselves. That said, I know there's a lot of research being done on other compounds. I mean, the other side of it is that the ayahuasca vine is it can easily become endangered because of where it only grows in the Amazon. And if suddenly everyone's wanting to do this, they could potentially become endangered, and it could, and so the idea of something being lab produced for something like that, I'm like, well, at least it, protects the plant. So I understand there's 2 sides to it.
Yeah.
However, when I really truly sit in my own discernment, I feel strongly about staying as connected to the original plant in its whole form as possible.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if I'm being honest. Yeah. So the word ceremony meant something very different to me. My first ceremony, everyone was saying the word around me, and so I used the vernacular, but it truly has a different meaning now.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious. Can you teach us about ceremony from a historical context, and then of course ceremony and integration, and what that process looks like. What is ceremony?
Yeah, ceremony. For many of us, and I know for me too. What I thought of what ceremony was from like age 0 to 20 was things like a wedding ceremony, or at its most casual, like a birthday party. Everything else was that I heard in the context of ceremony was maybe in some religious contexts that, while I was raised in certain religious contexts, I left them early in life because I also didn't like the harm they caused. And so I had some associations with ceremony in that context that I was like, well, I don't want anything to do with that. In these next 20 years of life, I've learned a lot. I've repaired a lot of my relationship to the idea of ceremony and spirit. And ceremony to me now is treating a moment with deep reverence, treating as like looking at life in the present moment and saying, we are here now, and how can we honor this particular moment right here, right now, to the deepest and most beautiful of our ability. And it's ceremony to me evokes an idea of depth. And it's like, how deep can we create this container to hold everything that may arise? And so historically, when I think about that, humans have always tended towards ceremony. I think from the beginning that humans could make a rhythm with, a bone and an animal skin. There has been ceremony from the moment they could start a fire, from the moment they would give birth, from the moment that they saw the sun rise over the horizon to start a new day and be like, okay, we made it through that night. I think there was this inherent in our bones, in our evolutionary bones, that was just like, we celebrate these moments because life was not safe for our ancient ancestors. It was like to get through the night was a big deal. So to beat the drum and dance around the rising sun was like a celebration and a ceremony. And I think it's encoded deep within us to have that. And where we're at now, this is just my kind of off the cuff anthropological opinion. It's like we've lost a lot of like what ceremony is in our lives. And it's like we'll have the weddings or the births or something like that, or the deaths. But even those can sometimes feel stilted and shallow. And I think people are really craving that depth because something within us says, take me into deep ceremony. And that can be through dance. It can be through plant medicines, and there's some powerful moments that happen there. And it can also not be. It can be through sharing space with one another and saying, this is the intention of what's going to happen here. Here's the frameworks of what we expect. Here's what to do. Here's what not to do. And the to do and what not to do piece, it's more about safety. I think when people take the to do and not to do and turn it into a mechanism of control, that's when it turns into the stuff that most of us maybe have had some negative experiences with. But the to do and not to do is about the safety that's needed for people to drop into the depth of the ceremony.
Yeah, and so it feels like a ceremony is a safe, open space that just allows something to happen.
Yes.
Hopefully something very positive. Normally something very positive.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the space that evokes the depth with an intention.
I love that.
Cool. I love that. Yeah.
I'm thinking of how we first began this conversation, exploring different ways that we fracture through a traumatic experience, or just it doesn't even have to be traumatic, it's just anything.
Yeah.
Any sort of change that is coming into your life where you're like, oh, I don't know how to navigate this new thing because I've always been doing it this way. I see such a connection happening between creating a practice where we identify those moments in our lives where we can either decide to try to figure it out on our own in isolation, or I don't know, just pretend it didn't happen, or just like right, or turn it into some sort of ceremony, create some sort of container with the people we love who support us, and create some sort of moment together where we can sit with it, where we can experience it, hold space for another person.
Yeah,
Um, those 2 things, I don't know, those 2 things just seem like they go hand in hand.
Hmm.
truly. Yeah. And I think about with integration, even the work I do clinically in that bigger, macro perspective, it is about how we work with the portals of death and birth. And, it's like everything, whether it's like a positive transformation in our lives or a traumatic event, it's like we're dancing at that portal of like what's being lost, what's being gained. And then how we greet each other at both sides of that portal is the ceremony. um, and it does matter. It does matter. And for anyone that has been through something, like we'll just say kind of the ubiquitous human events of like birth and death, if anyone who has been through witnessing or someone give birth, or witnessing or being around someone who dies, or losing someone, that like how you treat the space around that matters, and really makes an impact on how that experience is integrated into your life and everyone else's lives from that point forward.
Hmm.
What are some practical steps that someone could take who's listening in and saying, "This all sounds lovely, but I don't really have that many authentic people around me, or I haven't really been authentic with myself, and I'm becoming aware of that, I'm becoming awake to it, and I want this."
Yeah.
How do you find those people? How do you find your tribe? How do you find yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, that is a really good question, and one that a lot of people ask me, because they often find that after these fracturing experiences that a lot of life falls away. And sometimes that means people for sometimes no apparent reason. Maybe some people that you used to connect with, you suddenly just can't anymore, or just don't connect with anymore. Maybe there was already some of that loneliness and seeking there before. So practically speaking, I would say the first thing that someone can do if they really don't feel like they have any community is start to just get that one-on-one mentorship. That whether it's with a therapist, a coach, maybe you enjoy yoga or some kind of movement. I think movement can be a really good thing. I know yoga is not for everyone, nor is therapy. So it's more about like, seek that one-on-one mentorship. You don't even have to find the best person, just find a someone. If finances are an issue, look to see if there are, there's plenty of places. I know here in Nashville, a lot of folks, coming out of school have like sliding scale or low income options, for people. Um, and then, I think the thing that I talk about a lot with integration, is this idea of consistency and repetition, because part of integration is also creating trust with yourself, because a lot's been fractured and we're like, I don't know what to do. Who do I trust? What do I trust? Do I trust myself? And so trust is built through consistency and repetition. So maybe it isn't, the yoga class that you go to forever, but maybe you go to the same one at the same time every week for 6 weeks. Maybe it's you go to a new coffee shop, a different one, one day a week at the same time. But it's like what you're doing is you're creating this, you're letting your body and your psyche know, like, I can do this thing at the same time each time, and I can create consistency and trust with it.
Hmm.
It could be finding a new path to walk, finding like a park that you really enjoy being in, and just going for a even just a 15 to 20-minute walk makes a difference. It doesn't have to be a 7-mile hike. It's finding the little things, even if it's like a 15-minute window that you can repeat with consistency in your life, can really be impactful for integration. Journaling, writing. If you're not a verbal person, have a sketchbook, draw things out. Just some way that you're getting like what's in here, kind of using the tools of the hands to bring them into like outside of yourself. I see journals and sketchbooks. They're kind of like this analog external hard drive where we can organize what's happening in here.
Hmm.
Love that. Okay, so for anyone who comes across this video and comes across you and is thinking, hey, like, I want to be a more authentic version of myself. I definitely like want to find the practices that work for me. We've got a QR code right here in the corner. Talk a little bit about what if someone's drawn to you personally, talk a little bit about what you offer, what that process might look like, and what they can do if they scan this.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the QR code takes to the Calendly link where you can schedule a consult call with me, and it's just a free consult call where we can talk. You can tell me a little bit about what you're needing, and we can look at like if I'm a good fit or if I know someone in my network that would be a good fit. Because the reality is, my biggest goal is for people to find the resources they need, and if it's not me, then so be it. Like, I just want them to get connected to a resource they need. And it would be, what I offer. I mean, I do have my traditional therapy, like 60-minute blocks of time. Then I also have some coaching in there as well. There's just some subtle differences in the way that we would structure the meeting. And then I facilitate other journeys, specifically dance, using like dance movement as a way to help the body integrate deep experiences and excavate emotions that need to come out. And so those can be in private retreats, or there's bigger community events that we do that in. And then I also, facilitate like private ceremonies. Just as far as, I mean, and that can be anything. That's that is done with all within what is desired and available where we're at. And kind of like how we were talking about what ceremony is, it's the creating the container needed for someone to go as deep as they want to go, whether that be through energy, sound, the support of other types of wisdom that want to come in.
Amazing. And can you briefly describe the difference between choosing therapy or coaching?
Mm-hmm.
How those are distinct?
Yeah. So, I mean, essentially, what we do in the session is going to be pretty much the same. It's just like a therapy client is someone who, I'm working with through that lens. Like, I have my therapy license and my therapy lens, and I take them on as a client. They're usually someone that, and here's something that, as coaching is coming up a lot. I know there's a lot of different rules about how that operates, but with therapy, that is a client who, like, the relationship I have with them as a therapist and a client, that's the only relationship we have. We don't see each other outside of that dynamic in any other way. It creates that safety for them to know that, like, okay, this person isn't going to show up in any other aspect of my life, and it's just like, this is just what it's about. So it creates the set and setting sometimes needed for those really deeper experiences to happen. And so I treat that with a lot of reverence. And I think that is a sacred type of relationship to protect. Coaching, there can be different types of overlap. You might run into a coaching client in a social setting, but it's like you tend to work on kind of like, from this point forward, how do you want to structure your life? And it's like really like helping someone kind of like create the life they want, move forward. It's not so much digging deep into the inner workings of their psyche, or like going deep into the trauma. It's more like, well, here are your goals. How can we check in around that and create a game plan? Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah.
Totally. Nicole, and do you want to dive or look at the jump board a little bit that we built out?
Sure.
And maybe just, Lauren, you can kind of go over what's what with that. And let me pull it up here. Okay.
Yeah, and actually, let's kind of give some context to, let me talk about what we're looking at in general, and then you can take us into Lauren's. So if you go to jumpsuit.com, you'll be able to find access to this page. Basically, jumpsuit.com/jumpsuiters. And what I'm trying to do is actually create a distinction between, there's Jumpsuit, the agency. This is a business that provides professional services to businesses and brands. We'll build your website, we'll make you an app, right? It's more professional. The reality is there's so many people who are drawn to our network, and to our people and our culture, that there's just like way more people who are drawn to us than we actually have work for. Obviously, we're always trying to get new clients and more work so we can provide work to people. But I realized about a year ago, that I'm missing out on a big opportunity to actually create a network of people who identify with this independent spirit. I want to go out on my own. I want to build my own thing. And there's a lot of people beyond the professional, creative services like you, Lauren, who, you know, you're like, I feel like I want to be a part of this thing, but like I can't do a logo. Like, how do I get involved? So we've started expanding our network to involve more types of therapists and coaches and healers. We've got people who do Reiki and stuff like that that we're pulling into the network. For the same reason I described in the very beginning is I want to be able to support the independent network, and we're going to need each other, right? How hard is it for you to build a website? Right? It's easy for you to show up with a person and hold space, but to like do all the things you need to do on social
Yeah.
media, digital, it's just like, fuck, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these like groups of people who just inherently need each other. So anyway, Jump Scooters is this idea that we're building the independent network. Anyone belongs in it. And maybe there will be a chance for you to work for the agency potentially. But anyway, if you end up on this page, Jumpsuiters, we've got this section here called self-actualization, and it's pretty new. We're gonna build this out as big and wide as we can, but this is really the space for people like you, Lauren, who are like, I have this service to provide, to anyone who's looking for a new modality or a new type of container to support them on their journey. So we've got a handful of things here. We've got neurodivergent coaching and Reiki and combo and stuff like that. So, and by the way, Lauren, we can build out a couple of these for you. But we did just spin one up to support this conversation today. James is going to click in and yeah, if there's anything you want to talk about in particular, go for it.
Yeah. I love that little thumbnail. Yeah, this was a really helpful exercise for me too, because you may be able to tell, like, I work very intuitively. Like what I do is like from such like an intuitive process, and I really trust that process. And this was a really helpful tool for me to like, oh, let me break this down into what I do and find like the words. I love words. Words are fascinating. It's like it's like the little keys that we can communicate with each other, like what's happening with an idea. So, in breaking this down, I included the preparation piece here, because I think that's pretty integral to integration as well. To preparation really sets the stage for how you're going to integrate. So with the preparation, that stage of things is when I meet with a person, do a session and kind of evaluate their readiness. And, that's something, establishing readiness, I like to differentiate that from gatekeeping. This isn't like a gatekeeping and trying to decide whether someone can do an experience or not. It's more, for me, it's more like with where this person is at and what I know I have to offer, can we enter through that threshold together? There may be another space in which there's a different type of readiness. And then identifying the intention is really getting clear with that person, like, well, what are they seeking? What are you coming in here for? What is the drive, that inner piece that said, this is why I want to do this? And it doesn't have to be clear. Some people come in and they're just like, I'm just curious, or just like, I just feel like I need to do this. And that's a fine place to start. It doesn't have to be like this, I'm going to uncover what happened from ages 3 to 7 and there can be so many different ways to identify what that is. And then in the preparation is also what we talked about, the set and setting piece of really understanding what is that person's particular need and desire for how their setting will support their journey. So that's, and then in between like preparation and reflection, I didn't put anything there because that's the facilitation part, and we could go back and add that. And the facilitation, that could be with me or that could be with someone else. There's plenty of people I work with who just come to me for the preparation and integration, and then they go maybe travel to Costa Rica or somewhere for the experience, or maybe they go. I had a client who just recently went on kind of an ancestral journey through Ireland and Scotland, where they just they wanted to prepare for this, and they just went for a month and traveled And then they came back and were like, wow, how do I, bring this deeper wisdom into my life now? Some of it will be with me. Some of the facilitation could be whether we do dance or somatic practice or some other type of ritual work or therapeutic work. And then moving into, like, immediately after that, the first stage would be the reflection. It's kind of when everything's really fresh, being able to just like explore the story open-endedly, just say what happens, like without judgment, without analysis, just describe what happened, just speak to it. And then at that point, it's like, well, let's look at the different perspectives, because if you know speak about this to a Zapata elder in Ecuador, and who is going to interpret things through their framework of dream time, versus talking to a psychiatrist in New York, versus talking to, there's just like, look at the different perspectives and find the one when people are like, well, how do I know which one to listen to? Like, well, recognizing these are internal frameworks, which one orients you to a sense of self-love and peace, creativity and openness, or whatever it might be. If there are frameworks out there that orient you towards negative self-talk, then that's probably not a framework to use. So that's where, like, having someone like a mentor or an integration coach or facilitator can really help guide what type of perspective to use. And then, with synthesis, that is where we're kind of gathering all of that information and bringing it into like a comprehensive idea that creates meaning for the person. I think that's the part that when people stay fragmented after these experiences, they don't know how to make meaning of the experience because they don't have the framework to understand it through. And so they're trying to use an old framework that's not working anymore, and they're feeling really disoriented. So the synthesis piece is such an important part. Is like, how do you make meaning of this? And sometimes we do need, and that's where I think in my experience, having the wisdom of cultures and elders and mindsets outside of our own has been pivotal in bringing some depth of understanding to that synthesis. In that process, we also identify, what someone wants to do. It's like, okay, what is a doable thing? What's an actionable thing in your life right now? For the mother of 3 who's works a part-time job online, it's probably not doable for her to go, hang out, up, I don't know, in South Carolina for a week and, spend time writing, and so it's like looking at what is happening in your life right now? What cannot change? What do you not want to change? And then how to bring in the parts you do want to change into a reasonable form in your life. Or maybe there are things that you want to slowly change. Because I think slow change is fine. We don't need all these quick fixes. It's okay. And then the anchoring piece, that's where it's just, that's kind of, we get into this like maintenance schedule with, if we're meeting regularly, or we're just kind of regularly checking in with your growth, celebrating your progress. Insights continue to unfold. James, I'm sure you are familiar. It's like, there's like the initial insights, and then it's like months later, it's like, whoa, it's still unfolding. Like, wow, so it continues to unfold. And so it's just kind of getting that continued support. The shared learning I put on there because I find that community also is an incredible way to continue to embody what you've learned. It's like when you teach it or when you share it with others, or just share your own experience. It doesn't even have to be like, let me tell you how to do this. It can be just like, hey, here's my experience. And other people get to witness and hear that and get little sparks lit up in them or find some validation within themselves. I mean, that's how it grows, because, we 3 may be able to have experiences that 10 other people can't, but when we're willing to share our experience and process, it creates connection that those people can really benefit from. So we're all.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Truth. And then at the very bottom, click the button, goes to your Calendly link, like we were talking about.
Yes.
Awesome. No, I love that. I'm already just even having you walk through your process. I feel like a couple of things that stood out to me personally are just the reinforcement of like, go slow. It's okay. Like all of this, you have all the time in the world, right?
Yeah.
Just go slow. that feels really good to hear because I'm someone who goes really fast, and I like to, when I get an insight, I like to make it happen, and that just
Mhm.
doesn't work for me anymore. When
Mhm.
I have these flashes of inspiration, I've been on my own journeys with ketamine therapy and stuff. And it's like I can just be like literally doing nothing, chilling, and then all of a sudden I'm getting like downloads and all this energy in my body. It's just like so much at once, rapid expansion of consciousness. And then in that split second, I'm like, I'm realizing like do
Yes.
I can't do well, I don't know what to do with all of this stuff. And
Yeah.
so to hear you be like, slow down, and you have the choice. You have the choice on what you want to grab onto and what you want to work with. That feels
Yeah. Yeah.
incredibly liberating.
Yeah, that actually an analogy that I use with a lot of my clients is this idea like when we go into these peak experiences, whether it's birth or psychedelics or whatever. And it's like casting this wide net into the great sea of the subconscious. And like we're taken in this big haul and we're just like, oh my gosh. But it's like the reality is we can't digest all of that in one go. We may be able to store a little bit of it and go back, but it's just like it's okay to put a lot of it back and to just work with the gems that show up. And so part of the integration process too is also like, well, what is it that you want to work with? And what can you surrender and release back to the great sea of the subconscious and know that it'll come back to you if it is to be worked with.
That's beautiful.
Hmm.
That's a great way to end. Unless there's
Yeah,
anything else that you want to say, Lauren. Anything else you want us to know about you or integration?
It feels pretty complete. I think it touched on the main points that I would want people to know.
Amazing. Well,
Mhm.
welcome into our network. I hope that, I hope that people get to work with you or the people that you recommend. This is beautiful, important work, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for all y'all are doing. This is really, really wonderful way that we can all collaborate.
Yeah, you bet.
amazing. Thank you, Lauren.
Absolutely. All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.